The situation we're in at the moment is an interesting one. The policy agenda is steaming ahead, and it's now way ahead of where the science is at. So there's at least a gulf of 5 to 10 years between the kind of information that policymakers need and the empirical hard science in terms of geographically specific climate predictions. And when thinking about how climate is going to affect migration, the focus of policymakers in terms of the kind of questions that they're asking are very much around numbers. They're very quantitative. The policymakers are wanting to know how many people are moving, when they're going to move, where they're coming from, and where they're moving to. And in my opinion, those are important questions, but they're not the most important questions. And in terms of getting the right policy responses to address these issues and any future issues that might arise, there needs to be more of an understanding of the qualitative issues at a contextual level. So these are issues about why. And this isn't as prominent on the policymakers' research radar as it needs to be. I think there really needs to be a shift of these qualitative issues up the research agenda. So in terms of why this is a priority, that if you understand migration as the multifaceted, multi-causal issue that it is, you can see that climate change is only one issue that's going to feed into a complex mix of pre-existing factors, things like livelihood, scarcity, maybe poor access to resources, pre-existing marginalisation, lack of political representation, negative relationship between the community and the governance providers at the local level. These are all issues that climate change will interact with and potentially compound and might feed into the ultimate decision of an individual or a household to move. And from a research perspective, these underlying factors can be looked into in much more depth and understood, and then be fed into policy-making processes already. There doesn't need to be that wait for the climate science to catch up. So it's not just about dealing with a mass of migrants as they arrive. It's about understanding why they might move and addressing those causal factors. The issue is whether people are going to be able to cope with a host of potential risks. So that's about understanding their resilience to uncertainty and variability, because the nature of climate change is that even as the science progresses, we're aware of the kind of feedback loops, for example, where we might not be able to predict sudden shocks. So if we might be able to predict long-term trends, but it's going to be very hard, potentially impossible to predict where those tipping points, which will lead to very rapid changes, will be. So in that reality, focusing so much on the specific climate hazards is not as helpful as understanding the underlying factors around climate, around vulnerability to risks such as climate change. There's a lot of focus on responses to immediate disasters, sudden shocks, and that's what generates a lot of attention. You know, there's a dramatic flood, a huge number of people move at the same time. But in reality, the biggest numbers in terms of movements of people are these slow onset push factors, people that move in gradual trickles due to very slowly changing and livelihood contexts. As you know, as their lives become less viable in one context, they might, on a house by house level, just in small clusters, gradually trickle into different communities. And this slow onset movement of people is very hard to quantify in the way that a lot of policy responses look to. In the absence of specific localized climate predictions, policymakers are needing to move forward and decisions have to be made. And in the absence of that, the data that will enable policy decisions to address actual physical risks that are certain to take place, a very effective policy response will be to address resilience in the broadest sense, to build communities' abilities to cope with a host of risks, be they climate change or poverty or livelihood scarcity, which